long. This is sort of the first webinar we've had from the renamed organizational reform rig, and it's really focusing on giving two I think very contrasting views concerning the role of the private sector in education. The first sort of presentation that we're going to hear is by Abdushakur Tara, who's a colleague at Nottingham Trent University and has done a lot of work on leadership in post-conflict contexts in East Africa. And then once he's finished and we've had some questions, we'll then move on to presentation by Mark Innes, Louisa Dawes, and Liz Gregory, looking at aspects of privatisation in CPD in England and the impacts that that's had. So thanks ever so much for coming along. And without sort of further ado, really, Abdish, can I hand over to you if you'd like to introduce yourself and share your screen?
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thanks ever so much for agreeing to talk.
No worries. Thank you very much, Phil, for the opportunity. Belmas is an organization that I greatly admire the work it does. I had the opportunity to join in 2021 from directly from Somalia when they had the Ignite, I think, event, and it was such a lovely. Although probably before the end of the meeting, my presentation was a blackout, as you would probably expect, but did manage to come back. There was a gap of, I think, 30 seconds when public electricity goes off, and then the private electricity comes in. So that's probably sets the context of my discussion this morning. I just want to really share the screen. So do I have the privilege to do that?
I think so. It's down at
Okay,
the
let me
bottom.
just share the screen.
Yes, you do.
I can, okay. Yeah, what can you see?
Yep. Well, we can see your desktop screen.
Oh, okay. That's the wrong one.
If you start your presentation, that'll be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thanks.
So thank you ever so much, colleagues, whichever part of the world you are in. It's a great honor for me to share my personal perspectives on what I call it the low-cost private schools, which is a concept developed by Professor James Tooley, who was actually my supervisor. He was the former Vice Chancellor of University of Buckingham until January this year. So in order to really make my time more kind of very effective, but also try to get the context of what I'm actually presenting today, I will try to look at the country context, which is pretty much Somalia, the impact of the conflict on education. And I think it is really important for me to highlight that, because I want people to not to be shocked when I share the actual trend and the number of students or children and young people attend in non-state schools in that particular context. I mean, conflict zones. Then I will look at also the emergence and the dominance of the private sector and the rationale, or sometimes the factors that actually drive the private or non-state actors emerging within the context of conflict, but also non-conflict context. Then I will specifically look at organizational leadership and governance in low-cost private schools and why the head teacher role diverge in low-cost private schools compared to public schools, and then specifically look at organizational conditions that actually shape the leadership of the low-cost private schools. And then I will also include my own research and accounts. It's not only looking at the research concept. So this is because of the limited time I have. I'm not going to go through all my research methodology, aims, and objectives, but I will like to share what actually my research has also indicated in relation to the role difference between the private and the public schools. So, country profile: Somalia locates in the Horn of Africa, with the population of around 11 million, and also it has borders with Djibouti, Kenya, Ethiopia, and I think it's a pretty much a very volatile region in the Horn of Africa. As you might know, conflicts comes and goes. Educational in Somalia before the actually independence in 1960, the education was pretty much provided um, mainly by the colonizers, and Somalia was colonized by Italy, um, uh, Britain, and also some parts of Ethiopia. So you might actually be surprised why Ethiopia has become a nation that colonized other African countries. But I think is a kind of historical context that I would like to share here. So after the independence, the successive government of Somalia has actually maintained that philosophy of education free for its citizens, and the government has actually done tremendously well in terms of building new schools through a national mobilized campaign called Iska Wax U Qabso. And I think Professor would remember what Kenyan colleagues have told us, our Harambe movement, which also with it kind of similar. The role of non-state actors, and I'll come to you now in the few minutes. But I think let's also look at what I said earlier about, without mentioning the conflict of how private sector come into more kind of dominance role, is because we need to highlight why the conflict has happened, but also the impact it had on education. As you can see, there is a two trend I would like to share here. One is the macro and then the micro. The macro: complete destruction of education sector, both physical and human forms. So the teachers got killed, the head teachers got killed. Children sometimes also might be harmed in during actually conflict, and the shell is always, expectedly. So social development, obviously, the impact that the destruction of education has on human is a quite impacted, and currently there is a very very few percentage of children attending school. But I'll come to that later slides. The micro, clearly, shortage of school places as a result of destruction. As you can see, the picture over there is true reflection of what happened in Somalia around the infrastructure of education. A lack of trained teachers. Teachers either left the country or got killed during as a result of the conflict. And then the absence of professional development opportunities for teachers, head teachers, and other staff. So there's sometimes areas where you might not actually expect when it comes to conflict or active armed conflict, including professional development opportunities, which is quite reasonable. Now, in relation to school leaders, and I think what this is one my area I've highlighted in my thesis, is high prevalence of attacks on schools during active armed conflict. And also, it's very common that you hear the news that either child has been killed, teacher killed, or school leader killed as a result of that conflict. Both physical and psychological threats also is there. Sometimes, which is the context of Somalia as a civil war. So militia were running around cities and killing everyone that they see. Sometimes it's a clan base, but sometimes also it could be kind of property or any other assets based. Lack of resources, teaching and learning materials, and obviously those become very shortage because of the suppliers might not be able to produce more. Staff and children safety and concerns also to and from schools is quite very common. Right. Emergence of non-state actors globally, estimate is 98 million children and young people in sub-Saharan only. 40% of the global out of percent of children are also out of schools. And I think around, I would say 90%, 96% of Somali children attend schools, are enrolled in private schools. So, and this is what my colleague from Manchester University, Mr. Tahir, Dr. Tahir has actually indicated. So this is a kind of independent. It's not a kind of NGO-driven or government-driven data. As a result of that dominance, so 96%, so what left is, which is 4%, is actually mainly run as a public schools. And the private schools or the non-state actors are foundations, local faith-based foundations, private individuals, but it can also be international NGOs, which through either UNICEF or any other organizations. But this is exactly what UNESCO has actually indicated. It's a growing trend, without a doubt. I think Professor Phil would clearly had that during our roundtable discussion that we had in Nairobi recently, where even 90% of children in Nairobi city actually attend non-state schools. So that is what mainly drives it. Can in the context of Somalia, obviously the conflict. Before the conflict, there was only one private school across the country, but now you have a really very high dominant sector within that context. Now, why sometimes the trend is not changing, despite the government has actually been reinstated, there is a law and order in the country, and the government actually has a clear policy at a national level, but its influence has been mainly actually impacted negatively by the high demand of parents in terms of good quality and stable education, but also sometimes the diaspora retainees back home. They sometimes establish private schools in depending on which part of the world they came from or returned from. The Canadians more likely to Somali Canadians more likely to set up private schools and deliver Canadian curriculum. Those who are from Britain will also deliver British curriculum. So there's a kind of it's a very widespread sector that dominated by private owners. Absence of state regulations, although the government has just initiated a private school policy, but it's not widely adopted or accepted by the private sector. So the key questions, colleagues, we have, I would like to share is the concept of organizational leadership and governance within the local private schools. But without a doubt, some of you might actually have heard that concept of private local private schools. But I will also look at the organizational conditions shaping local private schools leadership. So, as I mentioned earlier, Professor James Tooley is known to be the great inventor of the local private schools during his 2 decades of involvement in this area of education. And there are a number of countries that actually have a highest number of local private schools. And these are these are schools that privately owned, fee charging schools that serve low income communities. And also UNESCO has actually recently recognized, and during that report, and I'm happy to share, colleagues, UNESCO published a report, the role of non-state actors in the context of delivery of education. And it's clearly probably rebrand or renamed as a low-fee private schools, which is essentially the same concept as the local private schools. So countries like India, which is estimated having almost like 450,000 schools, serving 92 million children, are the largest one, and to the least, which is Bangladesh, as you know, with very low economic or poverty, I would say, parents still prefer low-cost private schools than public schools. Now, how private schools are managed compared to public schools, these are the common things. I don't want to take much of your time, but if you look at the private school one, leadership in private school is shaped by the need to balance educational quality with financial sustainability. Absolutely. I've seen that on the ground when I went to Somalia, where the head teachers are really focus more on these two areas. And you would see, and I'll share that picture later. You'll see when you go to a private school is it's more kind of financial, commercially driven ethos compared to public schools. So you see in the private schools, they have so much high glossy leaflets in front of the school receptions. They have achievement photos of at the end of the exam results or celebration events all over the walls of the school entrance. And head responsibility is not only for the academic, but also consider themselves sometimes as institutional or kind of educational managers. And this due to, of course, market-driven and nature of private education, but also sometimes the parents consider it as an institution that can easily hold to account through, the performance that their children achieved. And with public schools are quite very straightforward, and you can look at the Department for Education website has a clear expectation of the head teachers focus more on instructional leadership, supporting teaching and learning, and managing and other regulated systems. Right. Organizational conditions that shape low-cost private schools, and I'm trying to actually also take some of the extracts from my thesis, and I'll share some of the examples here. High autonomy, but high risk. And what I mean by that, there is a school in Mogadishu where a head teacher decided, for example, to introduce a new after-school tutoring program to attract more parents. Now, it's a very good idea, but the risk on that, so the autonomy of that is quite very straightforward. No need any bureaucratic kind of processes being followed. So that he will make the decision, and also very quickly that can be implemented. The risk for that, if parents do not like that provision that's been set up in the after school, then they're more likely even to withdraw their children from the main private school, which is non extracurricular programs. So sometimes there is a high risk and also sometimes a greater autonomy. Direct accountability to parents without a doubt and owners. So sometimes what happened, a head teacher might actually own the school, and this is I'm talking about a non-teacher head teacher. So the head teachers who have no educational background or teaching background, and then they set up a school, and all what they do, they actually hire senior teachers and then appoint them and then delegate their teaching and learning and instructional responsibility to them. And I'll come to that at a later time. So in a entrepreneurial leadership style required, which is more focused, as I said, more commercial driven or market driven approaches, must manage finance, marketing, operations, and academics simultaneously. But sometimes that academic part is always left for the assistant head or the deputy head within the school. This is the picture I want to share. One of the schools that I visited, where it's really commercially run. The head teacher was a non-teacher head teacher, which is, I think, the code I've given in my thesis. So the two type of participant in my research. Schools that are actually run by head teachers that have educational background or teaching background, and then they actually have taken that career stage leadership, so assistant head, deputy head, and then they become head teacher. And then those you have head teachers who have not had any kind of teaching responsibility or never taught in schools or not been involved in teaching, and then they've been appointed as a result of their requirement in terms of having financial understanding, business management background, and although significant number of my participants were actually from that, but the majority were actually majority were teacher head teacher. So this non-teacher, head teacher participant have all echoed that the importance of having um, some understanding of financial management, business marketing, etc. So you can see these are the key priority and roles and responsibility they have. So this is a picture which I think one of the schools that I visited, and it shows this is written in Somali, which is the graduations cohort 2019-2020. So that is where you see all these non-state actors just to attract parents and also show case their performance in terms of achievement. I don't know how much time have I got, Phil?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes. So I'll still cut a couple of more. So in terms of organizational conditions that they see shape greater organizational autonomy, as I mentioned earlier, flexible staffing models. But sometimes I was really shocked when I see the kind of selection and the recruitment process followed by these schools was straightforward. The selection and recruitment of a head teacher can actually take place within 2 days. People bring their CVs to the school reception. Um, and then they will be given probably 10 minutes either telephone conversation, or sometimes they might actually come face to face to see two or three seniors, the owners of the school, and they are appointed. Independent financial management, so they have their own resources without any constraint or in terms of submitting a budget to external organization for approval. Market responsive decision making. So sometimes they all make decisions based on, for example, one of the example of I want to give is the fees charged to schools. If the school has a high subscription or enrollment, then they're more likely actually to reduce the fees that they charge from parents. Another area of organizational condition that shape is flexible governance. Head teachers act as both educational leaders and also operational managers. Through financial management, daily involvement in budgeting, fee collections, and sometimes you're really surprised when I ask the question, the head teachers about who is actually a professional head teacher. That's the key question. And one of the things they actually list is about financial management, fees collection, engaging parents. But the teaching element was really quite very almost not mentioned or vaguely mentioned in that conversation. Staff recruitment and retention hiring based on affordability. So if the school has high money, and sometimes they actually head teachers negotiate with the employees or the staff about their monthly salary. High turnover, reliance on flexible contracts, so that sometimes these teachers have not been given any kind of formal contract, but they're just told to come in and teach. Dual mandate, as I said earlier, business is quite very important factor. The way the schools are run. So it is education plus business, balancing learning outcomes with financial sustainability. And definitely the schools that have a high reputation, respect, have very strong financial sustainability and attract more the best teachers and staff in that context. So my research, which I really want to highlight also a little bit, is is specifically looking at the professional development of Somali head teachers. And I've specifically looked at the primary private schools because there were very limited public schools exist in the capital city of Mogadishu. There's 685 schools. There are only 23 schools in the hands of the government. Yeah. Right. So the points that actually emerged from my study, which, as I mentioned earlier, non-teacher head teachers context. This is what they actually told me. They see themselves as an educational managers, not instructional leaders. And as I said earlier, they actually shift that responsibility of managing teaching and learning and other curriculum-related activities to the deputy and assistant heads without any kind of a formal arrangement or formal accountability. So the head teacher totally rely on the judgment, professional judgment of the deputy and assistant heads. So sometimes in terms of hiring and firing of teachers based on their performance, that always lies on the deputy and assistant heads. They describe their roles as only managing staff, ensuring school security, maintaining buildings, dealing with parents, and handling finance. These are the non-teacher head teachers. And they often, as I said, delegated to those instructional roles to senior teachers, department heads, and curriculum coordinators. So for future research, and I'm really keen to connect with whoever is interested in this area, is as I mentioned, the deputies and assistant heads are given responsibility of managing teaching and learning within the school context, but they have not been actually given enough training to take that head teacher role, or sometimes really looking at the specific area of combining the leadership and the curriculum development. So there is a very, very limited training available to them. And that's one of the recommendations I made in terms of research, but there are also other recommendations I have made in my research. And I'm very pleased to say the Minister of Education responded to my research findings quite very positively. And they are in the process of looking at setting up a center for specifically developing the head teachers and offering some training that's necessary for their performance within the school context. I think I did very well, Phil. How many minutes left for me?
You've still got about 3 or 4 minutes left if you
Three or
want.
4 minutes. Okay, so in terms of the general context of education in conflict, it has really made a significant. And one of the things I want to share how the head teachers of these schools and their role is actually influenced or sometimes are different than the standard head teacher roles, particularly when there is an active armed conflict. I have seen or had the opportunity to meet some head teachers who have told me that they had to negotiate with armed militias to allow them to open and deliver education. So some of them have told me that they have to be paid, the school have to pay the militias in order to allow them to operate the school. So it's almost like sharing the percentage of the income generated through parents' contributions. Um, there are some very well-known head teachers who I actually had the opportunity to meet, although it was very restriction for me to to be some part of the city due to the conflict. But I had the honor to ask him to come and see me in my hotel, which was the green zone area, the safe area. And one of the things he told me that they had to actually remove dead bodies from the school playground who've been actually buried there. And it was really quite very an interesting and also sometimes very shocking scenarios. I believe the current climate and the conflict has actually increased. We are now talking about nearly 500 million children who are out of school as a result of conflict. Sorry, out of school in general, but I think 158 million children live within that conflict zone. So there are nearly half a billion children who are out of school for whatever reasons. It could be um, uh, governments not offering any kind of schools due to lack of resources, but also out of those half a billion children, 158 million live within the conflict affected zones. I think that's how I want to round up my session. And thank you ever so much for listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Brilliant. Thanks, Abdish. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Luis, for the clap.
Just while people are thinking about possible questions, I've got one sort of immediately because obviously myself and Abdish were in Nairobi last week, and one of the things that that Abdish actually ran was a round table with a series of really important people from East Africa to look at the role of private education in meeting SDG 4 targets. One of the things that I'm still a bit unclear on is when you say low cost, what is the way in which people pay and what is the kind of level at which they're paying the schools?
Yeah, I've actually wrote it down somewhere, but I never added that to the slides. You're absolutely right. I mean, what is the low cost private schools? We're not talking about an expensive provisions that we have in this country, like Eton College and other schools. According to Professor James Tooley, who's actually invented this concept of low cost private schools, argues that low-cost private schools are schools that are charging not more than $12 a month. So some actually schools like India, they do charge like $8. Kenya, for example, one of the worst, one of the countries that have high level of slums area, education is quite delivered in areas like Kibera, which is one of the largest slums in the world, and they charge between $6 and $8 a month. Yeah, so there are a number of criticism or critics on that concept of when countries have severe poverty and the families do not receive or earn more than let's say $1 a day. It's quite difficult, and but that concept is still exists, and sometimes you're more likely to find low-cost private schools in areas of slums in Nigeria, Lagos, India, and also Kenya. So there is a desperate communities will not wait government to provide education. They will take their own responsibility and set up an opportunity, learning opportunities for their children through this approach or maybe different approaches.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll come to Rob and then go on to Mike. So Rob,
Great, yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm intrigued about the context. I think I mean, it's dramatic context, and thanks for sharing it. I think you mentioned the advent or the rapid development of these no low cost private schools kind of originates from the war, and that there was sort of massive transition from public schooling to low-cost private schooling in the aftermath, in the rebuild. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of other contexts of kind of conflict and or devastation of some kind, and these kind of rapid transitions that can happen. So, for example, just to name one other that post Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, nearly all the schools was switched from state provided to charter schools, enabling new providers to come in and rebuild, recast the education system. So I just wondered what your perspectives were on that transition, which seems sort of foundational to your case, and which actors you think were influencing this kind of transition, and what their aims were. Was this being driven by kind of World Bank stroke kind of UN type kind of actors? To what extent was the national government, kind of driving it? And what were the sort of discursive aims? Was this a sort of attempted rollback of the state, or was it just kind of a context of aid but it seems to have quite dramatic kind of consequences for the future for the country in terms of education. And then secondly, and relatedly, in the Indian context, which you mentioned, the late Dutch scholar Josh Mui talked about education becoming increasingly a state of the poor, whereby the development of low-cost private schools was having a stratifying effect in terms of who was able to choose to leave the state. schools and the consequences of that in terms of who was attending. And so I just wondered whether you had
Yeah,
perspectives on this wider kind of structural privatization,
yeah,
who it served, what are the consequences, and what are the sort of discursive aims of this transition?
yeah. Thank you very much, Rob. You're absolutely right. Is it kind of transitional? Is it a temporary arrangement where the local private schools come in because the government is absent in terms of delivering education? I think most of the scholars who have written about the role of non-state education have clearly indicated the local private schools or even the non-state actors will remain in delivering education in the long foreseeable time. And the reason being, the number of reasons why the local private schools and general non-state actors are preferred in the context of delivery of education. And one of the reasons, for example, I was involved in late 1990s when there was an discussion around setting up a target, global targets called Millennium Development Goals and Education for All, where every child at primary school age should be in school by 2015. That has actually had a knock-on effect on the wider education sector in developing countries, because countries were competing to increase their enrollment without building new schools. And what you ended up is actually having an overcrowded classrooms. 95 children in a classroom, that actually put parents off when it comes to allowing their children to have a good quality education. So, and then you have an almost empty classrooms next to that, empty classrooms in a local privately run schools. So obviously, parents will make common sense decision and then actually move their children to that sense. So that trend, unfortunately, is still continuing. There is discussion, I'm sure. Phil agrees with me during the Kenya Educational Management Institute conference recently in Nairobi. People were really talking about the quality of education delivered in the public provisions. Um, I wouldn't say there is a clear anecdotal evidence in the low-cost private schools making a huge difference in terms of academic achievement, but I think the accountability is much clearer, much straightforward, and much direct than compared to public schools. The actors who are behind this are varied. Rob, the foundation is faith-based schools, individual entrepreneurs setting up because they see there is a gap in the market. But mostly international NGOs are also playing a role. Just recently, there is a British-based multinational education providers are also expanding in those countries. One of them is actually called Bridge International Schools. I don't know whether you're aware of that. Bridge International Schools do deliver education as low-cost private schools in some countries like Kenya. So it's really quite a very kind of contested area when it comes to the role of the private education in the long run. But I think, according to scholars that have read their argument, local private schools and non-state actors in general will remain in the sector for many, many years to come.
Thanks, Abdish. Mike.
Hi, and actually, I won't re sort of overlap because it was a similar question to Rob's, but there was just another detail I was curious about, which obviously low cost private schools involve fees. Um, but I also wondered because my previous sort of connections with sort of education in sort of African and less wealthy countries was is quite common for fees to be payable to state schools as well. So I don't know if that's the case in Somalia or not, but certainly I think it is possibly not always at primary, but certainly further on. So I just wondered if that played at all, and if there was comparison and just how that changed, because that might di make the differentiation between attending
Yeah,
two schools less obvious to the from the perspective of the parents,
right.
perhaps.
Thanks, Mike. Really good question. Political ideology, I'm actually left-wing militant, but my supervisor was completely opposite. And his argument has always been that private schools and should exist, and also his argument is that public schools are not free schools. They they do charge textbooks, they do charge pens, pencils that the children use in the schools. Parents contribute to that. So basically, what they're saying, what his argument is, public schools should not claim that they do not charge fees on parents. In the case of Somalia, as I said, there are very few public schools, and they seem quite very. I'll give you an example, and I think Professor James Tooley loved to hear these kind of newses where the government took over some schools in the city from foundations, faith-based foundations, who've been delivering education many years. And then since that, those schools becoming public schools, parents now starting to remove their children from those schools and re re-enrolling somewhere else that's mainly run by private schools. And the reason is because, and I ask the question directly to those parents, they say accountability is completely disappeared. Teacher absenteeism quite very high. Children are misbehaving. The head teachers almost become invisible. While when those particular schools were in the hands of the foundations of the private or non-state actors, head teachers was very visible to parents, almost meet and greet every morning. But that was not the case when these schools become the public. So I think that answers to your question, hopefully, Mike.
Brilliant, thank you. Just very quickly, because we need to move on in 1 minute. I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't know your first name. J.M. Smith is
Sorry,
just
I'm James.
sorry.
Thank you
Thank
for
you, James.
Sorry,
Yeah,
and I'll keep my question short. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering about the role of chains of schools, whether this phenomenon is made up of lots of individual actors or whether there are chains or federations or groups of schools at the heart of this as well. And if there are, whether that changes in any way the role of the kind of principal owner that you outline when it does become a chain constitution of some type.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good question, James. I really appreciate because when I was in Somalia to conduct my research, I was actually hosted by an umbrella organization or chain of schools that had, I would say, almost nearly 1,000 schools. And what these umbrella associations, they have a number of foundations combined. They really had a very good system, and I support them in terms of their governance and leadership while I was there. One of the things they had a system that actually makes sure that the fees that are charged on parents is fair. For example, if families, which is quite typical Somali families of 4 children, then they will look at the first 2 children will be paying full fees, and the other children 50% and then 25%. So that just to really make sure that the parents are able to afford the fees. Affordability is quite very important for them. And also what they do, that particular umbrella, which is called FPENS, Federation of Formal Formal Private Education Network in Somalia, has also a system where they actually generate income. So at the end of the year, they look at the profit margin and then dedicate a significant amount of that money reserves to actually provide scholarships. Those parents probably, as you can imagine, 1,000 schools, number of children around 850,000. There are sometimes children becoming orphaned during the academic year, and then what they do, they offer actually scholarship those particular children who lost their parents. So they have really quite a very humanly conscious or environmentally, but also more kind of corporate social responsible institutions in that sense.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Abdish. That was absolutely fantastic, and sort of it's never ceases to be really interesting to hear what you have to say with such a different perspective. So, with that in mind, I'd like us to move on and invite Mark, Louisa, and Liz to give us a perhaps a very different sort of perspective on private involvement within education in England.
Thanks,
Yeah,
thanks very much, Phil.
thanks, Abdish, and thanks, Phil. I'll just share this screen. There. Okay. I think we can all
Yeah, that's brilliant.
see that. And slideshow. Okay. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Innes from Manchester University, where I'm a lecturer in education leadership. Now I'll hand over to Liz to introduce herself as well.
Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Liz Gregory. I'm a lecturer in education at the University of Manchester. I'll apologise in advance. The house opposite is having a new roof put on as we speak, so it's quite noisy here, and I hope that none of that gets picked up. So if I mute myself, that's why.
And hello, I'm Dr. Louisa Dawes, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Manchester, Manchester Institute of Education, and I'm a lecturer in education as well. And I also might apologise because I have a cat that's decided to jump up on the desk with us. So, all in all, it could be an interesting presentation, couldn't it? Mark, do you want to just put it onto full slideshow?
Yeah,
It could
I was just clicking that, but I think it might be. I've just had an internet issue before with our building. It's a bit notorious for connection, and I got kicked out halfway through the questions, and it's showing as disconnected on the slides.
right, okay.
So
Do you
I'm
want
not
to
sure
if you try and power it up on the top left hand side again, so it goes, that little circular thing at the top next door to the HTTP.
is this on the Zoom?
On your screen, it'll be.
The little circular arrow next.
Yeah, just refresh
Oh,
the top,
that.
above it, above it, above
Okay.
it.
That would
That's
right.
it.
That
That
might
should
do it.
that should refresh it.
Right. Yeah, it's done it now. Sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't want to lose it completely. See, right.
And that
There we
makes
go.
me look like a technical wizard, which is
It does.
amazing. I'm not the case. So our presentation, I think, as Phil pointed out, might be something that's maybe significantly different from the last presentation, which, thank you very much, was really interesting. We're looking at privatisation in educational settings, and it's a kind of a tale of two halves. First of all, examining the privatisation of teacher development in England, and that impact on organisational reform. And then the second part of what we're going to be talking about is really focusing on our research, which is looking at our some work that we did, which was basically an analysis of the MPQs as a kind of a reflection of what that privatisation of leadership development might look like in the sector. And then we're going to finish that off with a little bit of blue sky thinking, I think, but maybe some discussion about that, of how we might think about a more effective way forward, which obviously has that privatisation element to it, and thinking about beyond that, what could be done within our systems for professional learning.
Our project that we're going to talk about actually started just over two years ago. We had a blog published in Bira, which was very it was a bit of a testing ground really for the project. It was very well received, the blog that we called House of Cards, and about the marketisation or the privatisation of school leadership qualifications in England, and we sort of developed some of the thinking from that blog into an article that we had published that we're gonna talk about. But the gist of the blog, we started by looking at the policy around national professional qualifications and did a bit of a network analysis of the various organisations that are involved in delivering NPQs. The NPQ now is quite an old qualification, around for well, more than 20 years. It could first come about in 1997, where Tony Blair's government wanted to professionalise headship, and I think there's a link there to the previous presentation with the idea of what a head teacher does, and is responsible for, with the NPQs put a different emphasis on. And that qualification was around for a long time. In 2017, the Department for Education launched new NPQ frameworks in middle, senior, and executive leadership, and refreshed the NPQH as well. And delivery at that point, when we look back in the policy, there was 41 accredited providers, and a sum of around £10 million of targeted funding was available at that point. So not a particularly substantial amount of money around at that point. We focused on the blog because it was slightly more current policy at that point, and the fact that in 2021, around obviously during the COVID times, and it was kind of not particularly high profile policy at that point. In the blog, we said that the Department for Education shuffled the deck by announcing a significant increase of funding for NPQs, £184 million, but also at the same time narrowed the number of approved providers who could deliver this suite of 6 NPQs, as they were at that point. Yeah, and then over to Liz.
Yes, anybody who enjoys an acronym will be particularly thrilled, I think, by the next couple of slides. Because the next policy event that we looked at was the announcement in 2022 about the National Institute of Teaching. And the announcement was that these 4 multi-school trusts, which was Star Academies, the Harris Federation, Outward, and Oasis, would run this new National Institute of Teaching. Now, there's been quite a lot written about this, actually, with regard to initial teacher training. I've just put one example there just to give you a flavour of some of the critique that's been levelled at this arrangement, which is in Viv Ellis's recent Teacher Education in Crisis book. We've got Daily examining this idea that ITT is being sort of moved towards a business model steered by competition, collaborations, and so on. So there's been quite a lot of attention focused on the Institute's role in teacher training. But interestingly, much less discussion of their position in terms of delivering these national professional qualifications. The DFE has identified them as a flagship lead provider. So that was one of the things that sort of piqued our interest, because the more you look at the arrangement as well, I think the more questions are raised. Mark, do you want to move it on to the next slide? Can I move it on? I don't know if I've got control of your screen or not. But if we look a little bit deeper as well, the 4 trusts appointed to run the National Institute of Teaching were also the same 4 trusts who had established the School-Led Development Trust. And each of these 4 founding trusts looks after a particular region. Their CEOs sit on the board of directors. Just to make things a little bit more interesting still, some of these trusts have got their own institutes or leadership colleges, which make up the school-led network, along with other partners. Just to give you an example, the Harris Federation, not only has it been identified then as one of these flagship lead providers of NPQs and part of the National Institute, it also has its own Harris Leadership College, which is part of that school-led network. And interestingly, on the National Institute of Teaching page, very prominently, these 4 trusts are identified as committed to transforming teacher development and the impact it has on school improvement. So we felt, sort of, given this very sort of high profile role, we would like to have a look really at sort of what is available in terms of teacher development for perhaps better established teachers.
Louisa, is this your?
Me, sorry. So you can see the analogy is developing into this idea of essentially a full house at this point. So 87 teaching school hubs have been linked up within these lead providers to access the market. So you can see at the bottom right hand corner, we're talking about this kind of pyramid of precarious privatized provision that is essentially disseminating the information through the National Institute of Teaching. So the Cranmer Education Trust, for example, was formed in 2015 from the Blue Coat Academy in Oldham. As people might know or might not know, it's a different kind of very different types of schools. Blue Coat having a very good reputation for itself as a grammar school. With only 5 schools within that multi-academy trust, they formed this Cranmer
All right,
Institute,
Margaret.
and delivering MPQs approved by the lead provider, which is the University College London. So as we said, this essentially is a dissemination through a privatised network to deliver very specific training within that reform. Mark, thank you.
Yeah. So we mentioned before about the significant cash injection that had been put into it when the policy changed in 2021-22. In 2024, there was a change again when the Department for Education announced a rolling back of investment in NPQs. Funding became restricted only to those 50% of schools with the highest proportion of students who attract pupil premium funding. So the funding was channeled towards the most disadvantaged schools, essentially. And that reduced things to only a quarter of the funded places would be available compared to what had gone before. So this was a big policy shift in the market and less money there in the system. But there was still funding available for NPQs in primary maths, headship, and special educational needs coordinators would continue to be funded for all schools. So this formed the basis of the article that we had published recently in British Education Research Journal. That formed our sample. That we thought if these 3 NPQs are being funded at that point, for all schools, and they're important to look at and see how this privatized model of delivery is maybe shaping these qualifications and maybe shaping what happens in schools. So this was our article that we had in British Education Research Journal that came out towards the end of last year. It's for a special edition of Burge that was focused on making teaching a more attractive profession, and we looked at research that was out there that links having high quality CPD to recruitment and retention in the sector, and we identified that it won't necessarily incentivize all being incentive for everybody, but there's a significant amount of teachers who could potentially be kept in the profession longer or enjoy longer careers in the profession with better CPD, and that strengthened the rationale really for us wanting to look more at this. We used a framework that was developed by one of our colleagues at Manchester, Professor Linda Evans, wrote in 2014 about professional development, and gave us a bit of a language to talk about the professional development as it's embodied in the qualifications, where Linda Evans breaks professional learning down into the behavioural, attitudinal, and intellectual. So the behavioural being about the processes and procedures that people apply in their work, attitudinal being about motivations for people's development, and the intellectual component, the epistemic dimension, and the knowledge dimension that's there. And we wanted to use this to think about the NPQs more deeply, because we knew from empirical data that people undertaking the NPQs saw them as a partial solution to their professional development. We wanted to think about why that might be, and how we could articulate that. We did just do a document analysis of the NPQs. We might in future do some empirical data gathering, but we wanted to use Linda Evans' framework to look at the NPQ frameworks in a systematic way. So we combined that with the ways of conducting document analysis for Robson, where we looked at each NPQ to identify and code them for their subject matter, the direction that they're giving, how are they telling people to do things, what values do they contain, what are the goals that are embodied in each NPQ, what methods do they promote, what traits are they looking for in people who are doing the NPQs, who are the significant actors, the authors of the documents, where they're located, are there any conflicts in the document, and how are they ended? And so this gives us a way to look through the NPQ frameworks in a systematic way, and then think about them using Professor Linda Evans' framework. And we're going to just share a little bit of our analysis next.
Thanks, Mark. So Louisa and I are just going to quickly talk through selected highlights from the data. As you can see, we've grouped together some of the categories that Mark was just talking about from the Robson framework. And these particular examples relate to methods, direction, goals, and values. So we were very interested in the values that seem to underpin the range of NPQs that are available for school leaders. And I think perhaps one of the best known examples from these frameworks is this dual framework of learn that and learn how to, which of course is consistent throughout the support provided to trainee teachers and early career teachers as well. And we noted that these are presented in an uncontested and uncontestable way, really, and quite simplistically, that if you learn a particular thing, then it will necessarily result in a particular outcome. And I mean, some of this is common sense as well, isn't it? And difficult to argue with. Actually, learn that high quality teaching has a long-term positive effect, for example. Interestingly, we did find there was some stuff in there that was more contestable and wasn't always fully evidenced, as Louisa is going to talk about on the next slide. So, for example, there's a lot in there about working memory and long-term memory, alongside sort of clearly authorized and privileged pedagogic practices such as interleaving, space practice, retrieval practice. Anybody who's been near a classroom in England in the last few years will be very familiar with these pedagogic approaches. And in a moment, there's another slide that gives some more examples of the pedagogic approaches that are highlighted throughout the qualification frameworks. And a lot of this is very similar across the three that we looked at. As Mark says, we looked at headship, maths, and Senko, and a lot of this is the same across all three. And all of them state that the point of all this is to provide a world-class start in life. And we felt that was a very narrow view of success that links back to the kind of the business model accusations that we highlighted earlier, that success is necessarily framed in terms of global competitiveness. Louisa, do you want to talk through some more of the findings?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, we're working on this assumption that world-class start to life is within that kind of like PISA ranking rather than anything else, and more holistically, which is interesting as well when we're thinking about the reference towards more disadvantaged schools, and funding for those teachers. So the next grouping was subject matter, authority, and endings. And actually, a lot of what Liz was talking about, obviously, there were some synergies between that. So as Liz pointed out, the NPQ shares similar content. Actually, they more than similar content, it's identical content that actually you can see right from the training, CCF, ECT kind of combined framework now through all the NPQs. So therefore, we're thinking about a very standardized approach to not only pedagogic approaches, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second, but the idea that a school culture, that professional development, teaching, and its implementation can be approached in a very standardized way. So it's bleaching out any type of contextual nuances within that. We noted as well that each one of these frameworks had 100 references. Again, with a lot of repetition and heavy reliance on very, very specific sources, notably the Educational Endowment Foundation, who had given us a little bit of a kind of a viewpoint that actually their work had been independently reviewed, the frameworks to ensure that they draw on the best available evidence, and this evidence has been interpreted with fidelity, which is a constant thread, this idea of fidelity from the evidence that's provided. But criteria is not necessarily transparent. And actually, going back to Liz's slide, this idea of fidelity is to do with standardization, but also to do with epistemologically coming from one orientation. So the cognitive science, for example, that the EEF are very much pushing towards, and actually, if you go into a school, that's the only way that learning takes place, is all part of this idea of the authoritative kind of like nature within these documents. All through the documents, interesting enough, have been developed by an expert advisory group. And I think we toned down, who we said was part of that and who wasn't part of that, Mark, didn't we, in the actual final paper? But we did suggest that it's a narrow range of high-profile individuals. So those individuals, and I always suggest they're like Australian actors, they seem to pop up all over the networks, were very much part and parcel of the authority behind the documents. Individuals from practitioner-focused institutions, rather than any other broader institutions, including HEIs, although there was one contributor from an HEI, which we felt led to an imbalance of the input as well. And then finally, there's a conflict between stating aims of supporting training and developing school staff and, of course, limiting their range of evidence. So not only do the NPQs sit as a kind of framework for teaching, but of course we have EEF that suggests what is good or bad within effective teaching and professional learning, and also, of course, Ofsted coming in and judging, echoing those things. So within this kind of prism that is being created, there is a very much a credible, authoritative kind of like way of doing things that we felt really straitjacketed the the NPQ and broader professional development for those school leaders. Anything else you want to add, Liz? No?
No, just to continue what you were saying, really, in terms of this kind of narrow range of privileged knowledges, sources of knowledge, pedagogic approaches, and so on. We felt there was a real conflict here. One of the categories that Mark was talking about before was conflict, and we felt that there was conflict across all three of the qualification frameworks that we looked at. But for me, I think this is the one that stood out, is that these qualifications profess to help students develop, teachers develop these very agentic characteristics. However, actually, it's never actually explained or explored how these are to be developed. We felt it was very top down in terms of its approach to leadership. And again, we've just put a few examples on here for you in that there's no discussion, for example, about whether synthetic phonics are the correct method for teaching children to read. The maths one, which is the one that I looked at, it talks about being informed by the best available research evidence, but then that is almost entirely focused on mastery. You had to have achieved a certain qualification in maths mastery to be allowed to do the NPQ for maths leaders. There's a lot in there about modelling and memory. So again, just to give you another example, the maths NPQ uses the term model or modelling 31 times within its framework, very much to the exclusion of other potential approaches. So again, that kind of straight-jacketing idea that Louisa was just talking about.
Shall I finish
did,
off, Liz?
Yeah, you did the Senko one, didn't you?
Yeah, so I did the Senko one, and again, I think very much as Liz and I have been talking about this idea of evidence base, of which there is a very specific evidence base coming from a specific epistemological positioning. But the other thing that was very significant with this, and I thought, very salient for the Senko, who are working with and had actually the responsibility for the attainment of not only those with a special educational need, but the whole school, were working across evidence base to improve teaching at a cost-effective way to improve pupils' academic outcomes. So very much thinking about the idea that actually, in one way, there's a high fidelity towards a very specific authoritative way of teaching, but also that's always matched up with this cost-effective approach. So an interesting kind of depiction of how knowledge is configured within those frameworks, and the methodology and methods that are suitable for people to learn as part of their professional learning.
I think we're running a little bit short of time now, aren't we? But we've got a few conclusions that we'd like to present to you. Mark, do you want to start off with this bit?
Yeah, I mean, the link to all of this with privatisation is that the privatised model that the government have adapted for the delivery is driving. We feel that this very functionalist and simplistic take on teacher learning in NPQs. To sum it all up, we found that there's a lot of emphasis on what Linda Evans calls the behavioural component, telling teachers and leaders what to do, and that the strong promotion of particular methods and subject matter excludes a lot of experiences and other approaches. We argue in the article that the current NPQs are a vehicle for promoting prescribed leadership and pedagogic practices, and that has a stymian effect on teacher leadership development. We're particularly keen to talk about this and to promote this article because there is a current review ongoing with the government into NPQs, which we hope might lead to change. And so we're trying to promote this particular issue. in that we hope that there might be a more thorough overhaul than there has been previously, to draw on a wider range of evidence. We feel that for teacher learning and school leadership to move beyond practices, it needs to go beyond the particular golden thread as it stands, and allow a more intellectual approach to teaching and the profession. We make some recommendations in the article, which we've also discussed with USET, the University Council for Education of Teachers, and we've got a BERA blog as a follow-up coming up about this, where we suggest that there could be clearer pathways to a variety of qualifications, as well as NPQs, master's qualifications, and that there should be more of a focus on depth rather than breadth. There's 10 of the NPQ frameworks currently, and we feel that narrower, deeper qualifications would allow for a wider range of approaches that would allow for more contextualized application of practices. I think there's a lot of evidence to say that school leaders need to be agile in the way that they respond to their school contexts, and we don't feel that the NPQs, as they are currently, promote that sort of agility that they need.